Are being recorded, just so you know, the videos will be available within a couple of days. And welcome everyone to the Rec Lab, to our workshop today with Shaun Spalding, who has been integral mentor at the Rec and has helped us to really build our incubator here. He's been with us since a year before we actually even launched, and helping every step of the way, and we really appreciate it. So, and love working with Shaun, love the work that he's doing for the Rec, with the Rec, and then also with NMR, with New Media Rights, and Cal Western School of Law, wherein he has been able to provide just the critical support and the advice that new founders really need in order to be successful when they're launching companies. So if you are part of the incubator here, chances are you have either talked to Shaun or you will be talking with him in the near future. And he's the one to ask when you need that law advice he's doing. So we're lucky to have you. We're lucky to have you. Thank you, Shaun.
Yeah, all right. Sounds good. How's the poll doing? Everybody get in? It's your last chance.
We have a few more people who are kind of in the middle of it. So if everybody could just go to that poll, submit your answers. 3, you each get 3 choices. And then we can close that poll in, let's say 5, 4.
You're gonna regret it if you don't get the ones that you want.
Right, I'm gonna go ahead and close that poll, everybody.
This could be the biggest choice you make in your businesses.
And I'm gonna go ahead and share the results with everybody.
All right, business formation. That one has never been picked. Oh no, it has been picked. Never mind.
It's been picked. We've done it before.
What do lawyers do and how to choose one? That one has never been picked.
Which one has never been picked, did you say?
What good lawyers do and how to choose one. Oh, but it's actually 4th place. Never mind, because copyright is over it. So business formation, contracts with third parties, and copyright coming in very close to everything else. Okay, all right. So I am Shaun Spalding. I am Assistant Director of New Media Rights. We are at Cal Western School of Law. We're a nonprofit. We help a lot of creators and entrepreneurs and people who are starting up businesses or making creative projects and need legal services but can't necessarily afford $300, $400, $500 an hour for a lawyer. I teach a class to law students as well on internet law, and so a lot of what I'm going to be saying here is not necessarily going to be a random regurgitation of laws, because nobody needs that, and Wikipedia knows more about law than I do. What I will be telling you is mostly about how to do your own research based on how to spot issues that you're going to encounter. And so hopefully I can empower you to help yourselves, right? Instead of just telling you things randomly right down here, I'm going to give you a framework for how to think about your issues, right? And this is because we don't have much time here, and I'd like you to come away with something useful, which is knowing how to help yourself, not necessarily just some random facts. And so based on the poll, the first thing we're going to talk about is, oh, can you bring up the poll again? I'm sorry.
All right, let's see here. And there we go.
Business formation. Okay, so what do you need to know? Oh, by the way, we have a book. It's called Don't Panic. It's pretty cheap on Amazon. It talks about a lot of these issues. And so if you love this, take it home in the book format. All right. So choose your own adventure. These are the different things that we could talk about. Business formation. All right, so you probably discussed this in passing. You've probably read some blog about how you should potentially form an LLC or a corporation. And so this is what those blogs might have told you, right? So you're currently, most likely, if you don't have a formalized entity, an entity in California, which is called a sole proprietorship. And so this means all sorts of things, but mostly it means that you fill out your personal taxes, also connect with your business's taxes, and your liability for the business is the same as your personal liability. So this is very different in LLCs, and it's different in corporations. And the big thing that you need to know is that LLCs, corporations, other formal corporate forms, they are the things that make sure that, for example, if you got sued, you won't lose your house or your car or things like that. And also you get potential tax breaks, right? Because certain LLCs can write off certain things, right? So sometimes it costs more money to be in a formal entity, and sometimes you save money if you're in a formal entity. All of these things are wildly different depending on what any of your businesses are doing, but this is pretty much where I imagine most articles that you're going to read online end. So let me take up where they don't talk about it. Well, hold on. Let me give you some more bullet points. So limiting personal legal liability, that's good. Advantages for taxes, this is another good thing that comes from formal entities like LLCs and corporations. Also, something that people don't necessarily always think about is that having a formal entity is often a mark of professionalism, which is good, right? Everybody calls themselves, I'm a CEO, but then they're not even a corporation. So you're not necessarily a CEO just because you run your own sole proprietorship. But you can be your own CEO if you are a corporation. Finally, oftentimes having a formal entity is necessary to secure outside investors who aren't friends and family, because the nature of an LLC provides more protection, or a corporation provides more protection to outside investors, right? There's more likely that they'll be able to believe that you are going to act in their interests, because an LLC has to have a separate bank account that's not your own bank account, etc. And so if the nature of your business requires outside funding, the earlier you formalize your entity, probably the much easier it's going to be. All right. Well, why would someone stay informal, which most of you are currently, I imagine, and that it's cost basically no money to start or maintain a sole proprietorship. If you didn't know you were a sole proprietorship now, congratulations. Now you do. You have, California has a category for you, even if you didn't know that you were in that category. And so no formalities and few administrative requirements. You created one and you didn't even know you did. All right, so now what is the real question that people ask that actually is the reason why we're here? How do I figure out if it's worth it to start it? Because most people ask me, well, if it's going to cost me $2,000 to $3,000 to start my LLC, between fees to the California government, legal fees to lawyers, even if you do it through LegalZoom, you're going to end up spending at least $1,000, even if you do it by yourself. And so, well, why should I do this? Is when do I know that this is the right thing to do? And so let's go through how we know whether this is the right thing to do. We have a balancing test, right? I'm just making this up, but I think it's a really useful way to think about it. Number one, if an LLC is good at shielding you from legal liability, so what could go wrong, you start by asking yourself how valuable your personal assets actually are. Because some people don't own anything. And so if you don't own a car, or you don't own a house, and you have $100 in your bank account, maybe it's not worth spending $1,000 or $3,000 to protect that $100 in your bank account, because you don't have anything valuable. But some people are starting businesses and they have a house or a car or a college fund for their kids. And so to the extent that you might have $100,000 worth of assets, it then becomes much more reasonable for you to want to spend $3,000 of that potentially protecting it, right? So again, think about how many assets you have Then this is about what could go wrong. And then finally, your willingness to take on upfront costs. All right, second pillar of this balancing test, the probability that things could go wrong. Well, everybody is starting a different type of business here. And as a result, everyone has different things that can go wrong. And so imagine someone with a type of business where few things could go wrong. Let's say you just run a blog about recipes or something like that. Like, no one's going to be offended by your recipe for mapo tofu, or you're baking, I don't know, you're baking cookies or something, and your recipe for baking cookies. You might have some liability from the users who go to your website, but there's no interaction with those users. You're not selling them anything. They're not relying on some sort of representations for the accuracy of your information, right? If your information is inaccurate, they burn their cookies or something like that, but there's no real problem. Contrast that with, let's say, someone who runs a blog that provides financial advice, someone who is selling food that can make people sick, someone who's manufacturing something, right? As soon as you manufacture something, something could break or something could hurt someone. If you have a physical premises, someone could slip and fall on something. And you can see that if you think about what you are currently doing right now, you can imagine a whole host of worst case scenarios. And I think that those are the scenarios that you should think about and ask yourself, if that happened, would I be okay with personally being liable for those things? Because for some people, they might say, yeah, because not very much can happen. And some people might say, of course not. And then you'd be much more likely to want a corporate form, like a corporation or an LLC. Here's the issue. You don't really know what you don't know. And so how do you figure out what things could go wrong? You don't just sort of start and stop with what you can think about at face value. You should go in and Google and do research about all sorts of people who are doing the similar things that you've been doing, who have gotten sued before, or who have gotten settlements before that they had to pay out, or who regulators have gone after them before. Because you don't actually have a good, like, as someone who's starting up in this industry, whatever industry you're in, you don't actually have a complete picture of what could go wrong, right? The people who got in trouble for these things that you're going to research probably didn't know that those things could go wrong either, or they would have not gotten in trouble. And so you want to learn from all those people, and this is how you balance the idea of something going wrong. You don't just stop at what you can think of at face value, you continue and do research to figure out what other people have gotten in trouble for. And then finally, your willingness to take on upfront costs. And so some of you have money, right? Some of you might have $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to start your business. And so if you have $30,000 to start your business, spending $2,000 to $3,000 on making sure that everything is all clear at the beginning might be a worthy investment. Some of you have $0 to start your business, and you're doing it with a level of passion and commitment and sort of boots on the ground, but you're not doing it with capital. And as a result, if you're choosing between whether or not you're going to spend $1,000 on creating your product or selling your first 10 or first 100 of the product, or starting an LLC, it seems to make a lot of sense to actually try to make money and prove that your product can be sold rather than starting an LLC. And so one of the issues that sometimes I mean, here's the thing that I want to do. If you, like, I would like to separate what you will read on lawyers' websites, which say, you should do this, you should do that, with what the practical reality of someone like you might face. Because if you go to a lawyer who specializes in business formation and you ask them, should I form a business? They will say, of course you should. I mean, mostly because that's what they do, and they'll tell you all the reasons why you should pay them to do it. But I realize that not everyone is in that position. And so I want you to be able to take what those people say, right, on their blogs, and whether if you meet them in person, but then also use your own judgment to figure out what you actually need. because you don't actually always have to take everything a lawyer tells you that you need. And so you need to really gauge your willingness to take on upfront costs as opposed to your willingness to spend that money on something else that's more important to your business. Because a lot of people start LLCs, let's say they started on LegalZoom and that costs $1,000, but then they realize that their business actually wasn't viable. So now they have this LLC that's going to cost them another $1,000 to wind down, because you can't just abandon it, right, if you're not using it, because this is something that the government wants you to use if you start it. And so you have to also pay to finish it if you didn't use it. And so this is the situation that people end up getting in, where they didn't even use the value that they were getting from it, but they paid money to do it, and they also spent time and energy doing it when they could have been doing something else. Again, really sort of weigh these things intelligently. Don't just believe at face value. It's like, you might not even know what your valuable assets are, right? You might not know that a trust that you have your kid's college fund is valuable, right? So, all right. So when should I form my company? This is the other thing that people ask. So now that you balance this and you're trying to figure out, well, okay, do I have the money? Is there something to protect? Here is another timeline to tell you how to think about when you should do it, because I'm not saying that you should do it right now, but I'm also not saying that you should do it much later when it might be too late to protect you from liability. So let's start at this timeline. This is the timeline that a lot of you are probably in right now. So it goes from having an idea about a product to determining the viability to then actually selling the thing, or at least bringing on internal partners to work on the thing, bringing on external partners to distribute the thing, creating a minimum viable product, which you probably talked about with Tanya, or a beta if you're talking about software, and then finally a soft launch. So somewhere in here is the time where you're really considering whether or not to form a business. And so let's walk through this. Let's say I have an idea, and my idea is I want socks. I'm making this up. I want socks that I can put in the freezer because my feet are always too hot when I'm wearing socks. And so it'll be perfectly right if I just put these socks in the freezer and put them on. They'll be cold and hot at the same time. Should I form an LLC right now? Unclear. I mean, I don't necessarily know how valuable my own personal assets are, but let's say I do own a car, right? Probability that can go wrong. I am making a physical product. Willingness to take on upfront costs. Well, I don't really have very much money, and I'm spending all that money to manufacture 100 socks. All right, now I need to determine the viability of my product. I talk to 100 people. Will you wear socks that also go in the freezer? And they're like, of course not. Socks are here to keep your feet warm, right? That seems like a stupid idea. And then I'm like, that is a stupid idea. You're right. So I've saved myself a lot of money because I didn't form my LLC yet. But maybe you did have an actual good idea. And maybe you decided that, okay, well now, let's say my actual idea is I want socks that have heaters in it because everybody tells me that they want warm socks, not cold socks. And so everybody's like, this is perfect for camping. And so I need to manufacture socks that have some sort of technology in it that also heats the sock. And so I need to bring on a partner to do this. This might be an engineer, right, who has the ability to put this sort of microchip inside of the sock that heats up on command without burning people necessarily. And so as soon as I do that, now I'm beholden to another person. I might be even sharing equity in the company with this person, right? My risk goes way up because now two people's personal assets are at risk, right? The probability that goes wrong, we can have something externally go wrong. These socks can burn people, but we can also have something internally that goes wrong. This person believes that they own more of my company than they actually do, right? That's also a risk, and it increases every time you have a new person in the mix. because everyone has a different understanding of what it is that is actually going on in the business. Finally, bring on external partners. Okay, we've made our first 1,000 of these, right? And we have a store that is willing to sell them. Well, nobody's going to sue me necessarily, right? Because I have no money, right? I spent all my money on 1,000 socks that I don't know will sell. But let's say that I have, I don't know, Hot Topic or Abercrombie and Fitch or one of those mall retail stores decides that they're going to sell my first 1,000. Lots of people want to sue Hot Topic because they have money. And so as soon as you start working with an external partner, or you believe that you might, things that go wrong go up enormously. The value of their assets also skyrockets, right? And so now you can see that as you're approaching actually launching the product, the more liability that exists and the more likely that it is that you might want to form your own business, right? To actually formalize this. Okay, well, can I protect myself even if I wait? And so remember, when we told this story, we brought on an external partner, Hot Topic, but they still haven't sold my socks yet, right? And so now you're in this weird conundrum where you spent $3,000 manufacturing socks, and you have someone who will sell the socks, but they haven't sold the socks yet. So you don't have any more money to launch the LLC. Am I in trouble? Can I protect myself even though I've waited so long in this process? So the answer is yes and no. And so there's two things that potentially limit risk, right? Contractual obligations and mitigating risk through insurance. One thing that we'll talk about, since it's part of the poll, is contracts. And so you can have contracts, for example, with your internal partners that lay out all sorts of ways that the business works, so less things can go wrong. You can have contracts with your distribution partner like Hot Topic, which says, oh, well, if X things goes wrong, I'm not liable for those things because I don't have any money, so I shouldn't be liable for those things. And maybe they'll agree to it. So this is how you minimize the things that go wrong, which make it at least a little bit more reasonable that you haven't formed your business yet. And so we'll talk about more depending on what the poll answers are as to what we are going to talk about with contracts. Can you bring up the poll again, please? I unfortunately have forgotten the second. Usually it's like a landslide.
So I know, it's pretty close this time, pretty close.
Yeah, contracts with third parties. All right, that's a great thing to talk about. Okay, so you have contracts with external partners. So what I mean by this are vendors, developers who might be creating your website or an app that you're making. So this could be anyone, but I'm going to use the context of developers because I think it's a really useful way of thinking about all external partner contracts. And so if you hire a developer, they are going to be, let's say it's an app developer, they're making an app for you. But this app is incredibly complex. And there's something incredibly important about understanding your relationship with these people. It's that you have no idea how the thing that they're making works. And so this is very different than buying something from a store, right? If you buy something from a store, you like, oh, you're buying, I don't know, a toaster. You clearly don't need to know how it functions in order to have a good transaction. You just need to know what the features you want or don't want in a toaster. It's very, very different when you're hiring someone to make something that is open-ended, because if you don't necessarily know how to assess the performance of the people doing work for you, then it's going to be very, very difficult to know what you should be asking for or not asking for in your contractual relationship. One thing to understand, and I think it's very important, is that contracts are not magic language. When I start talking about contracts in a minute or two, I don't necessarily just mean a formal document that a lawyer will put together, because anything can be a contract. All I need to do is say, I want something. Do you want to give it to me? That person needs to accept it, and then we need to exchange value. And so that can be done through emails, that can be done through conversations. And so you don't necessarily need a lawyer to think about contracts in this way, or to think about your relationships with external people this way. And so in order to make things understandable, I'm also going to use, in addition to software developers, I'm going to use an example of a lemonade stand, because that also makes things easily to understand. And so first, I'm going to talk about website and app developers, right? The things that you're going to have to talk about, and the things from a common sense standpoint that you should think about when you're thinking about how to work with these types of people or any external partners, are what are the deliverables? What is it that you are giving to me? And what is it that I am potentially giving to you? And so with something like an app, you want to be highly specific, which as to what it is that you're actually asking for, because the scope of what they're doing needs to be reined in somehow. And so if I were a lemonade stand, my deliverables would be, I would like 100 pounds of lemons delivered on Tuesday, right? So that's the next thing, is timing, delivered on Tuesday. And so people who make complex products like apps are generally working on milestones. You can't necessarily make the whole thing in one go, just like you can't necessarily build a house in a couple days, right? You build the foundation of the house, and then hopefully you check the foundation to make sure that it works, and then you build the scaffolding on top of the foundation and make sure that it can stand up, because you don't want to necessarily build the house all in sort of one flow, like building part of the foundation and then building part of the house, because that doesn't necessarily make sense. And so each of these deliverables is going to be timed in a certain way. And one thing to understand is that oftentimes multiple people might be working on different aspects of a project. And so the timing is critical, because oftentimes one person will not be able to do anything if the timing of another person delivering something doesn't work. And so whatever it is that you're buying, right, you need to understand how the connections between one person needing X and the other person needing Y to continue work. And so here's this in the context of a lemonade stand. All right, well, we need to come up with our unique lemonade recipe before we start selling it. So even if I'm buying 100 pounds of lemons from you, I need 20 pounds of those lemons by the end of the week, because we need to start testing the lemonade right now. Because if I just wait for a month for you to give me all 100 pounds of lemons, I will actually not be able to make my test lemonade to figure out which ones taste the best. And so timing becomes incredibly important if we want to be able to work with other people, third parties, on these things. Minimum standards. All right, here's another thing. So oftentimes you cannot predict the future, right? So people think about contracts and, oh, well, here's what I want. But if you think about it, you don't always know what you want ahead of time, especially if you're working with a type of person like an app developer that you have no idea what they're actually doing. Again, this is very important to understand, that you don't know how what they do works. And as a result, you don't necessarily, until you have a problem with them, you don't necessarily know what it was that you did that would become the problem. But oftentimes you do know what you don't want, right? And so you can actually establish minimum standards for what you want the work to be. So, for example, if it's software, I would like the software to run at minimum on both Android and iPhones, right? iOS, right? You don't know all of the types of phones people will be using 10 years from now or whatever, but you do know the type of phones that you want to work on now. Or I want to make sure that the app is bug free 99% of the time. Well, you can't necessarily dictate what bugs there are because you don't know yet, but you do know that this is the minimum standard that you want. Let's say you're a creative person, right? I don't know where I want to be credited necessarily because I don't know where my creative product is being distributed, but I do know that I would at least like to be credited in the same way that you've credited people in the past, right? And so that is the minimum standard that you're working on. And so you're really thinking about what is it that I want to prevent from happening? What is the worst case scenario? And then I'm going to present that as my threshold for where I want to be at. And if you're looking at all three of these things right now, you're going to see something which I hope is useful, which is these are not things that it takes someone with some like big brain or some, I don't know, 3-year degree in the bar, like passing the bar to figure out. You can figure these things out for yourself based on the specific facts of what you're doing. And so I want you to think about these pretty abstractly because you can create your own contract by just thinking about these things very carefully and then laying them out to the people that you're working with in a manner that you can prove, like in writing or an email, etc. And then one day when you do have the resources, then you can come back and memorialize this by hiring a lawyer. Right? Because if you figured out all of these things ahead of time and everyone's already agreed to it, it's much easier to then put together a formal contract. But you can be doing all of this yourself because it's not magic. Something else. Okay, so something else, technical support, right? Imagine you hire someone and they build an app for you. And again, it's not like buying a toaster because there's no end to building the app. Right? As soon as they build the app, people use it. And then when people use it, it breaks. And so you actually have an ongoing relationship with many of the types of people who make complex products for you or who have complex relationships with you. And as a result, if you don't understand how the thing works that they've delivered to you, you cannot adequately help people who the thing breaks for. And so you have to still engage these people over a long period of time to make sure that they they both, A, fix things when people realize that it's broken, but also tell you how to help the people using it, how to avoid the bugs that are currently in the thing. So both squashing bugs that exist, but also making sure that the people who are using it get supported while those bugs are being squashed. And so I think a lot of people think that when they're walking into relationships with people making complex products for them or providing complex services, that you're just buying something. And you're not buying something, you're actually buying into a relationship. And so these people should understand that it's not that once this thing is delivered, their job is over. Instead, their job just begins, right? And so this also moves forward. So let me give you a lemonade stand example. I get 100 pounds of lemons from you, but I don't know, maybe 20 pounds of those lemons, they're bruised, right? Oh, is it that these lemons are bruised and now they're no longer edible, so I have to throw them away? Or are they bruised, but even though they look bad, they're still perfectly fine as lemons? Will they taste different if they're bruised, etc.? I don't know any of this because I'm not a lemon expert, but the people I bought the lemons from clearly are. And so they need to be around to tell me how to navigate this issue, whether or not I need new lemons from them or whether or not I can use the old bruised lemons that they already gave me. Updates and continuing service levels. All right, so again, this is why your relationship continues, because assuming that you got 100 pounds of lemons and they were all good, then you want to continue getting those lemons from these people. right? You want to be able to have a relationship in the future, and contractually, you need to state that in advance, because let's say you're working with an app developer who's a student, or who's sort of an entry level person. So they're working for cheap, or they're working for equity or something like that. They might leave when they find a better opportunity, right? They find a higher paying job, they find a project that sounds more exciting. And so you want to make sure that these people are also in for the long haul, and you should have them agree in advance that they will be, because you will absolutely need that if they create something complex for you that you then rely on for your business. Again, imagine if for some reason I've been getting 100 pounds of lemons from the same person each week for 5 months, and then the days later I learn that they're actually not going to give me lemons anymore because someone else is paying more money for it. And so now I have to scramble to figure out how I'm going to get all my lemons now because they dropped out on me. This is going to be very, very difficult. Finally, ownership of the work created. So this is very important because one thing that generally does have to be in writing is transfers of ownership. And so unlike many of these other things, which you can sort of talk about in the abstract, right? You can have emails that sort of have vague information related to these things. Ownership is something that you have to have explicit information about this, and hopefully explicit written information. So a rule that is probably the only substantive rule that you should come away from this with is that if you hire someone to make stuff for you, like make creative work for you, like a logo, or write stuff on your website for you, or I don't know, create an app, pretty much any creative work that you can think of, that person is generally considered a contractor, right? I mean, there's lots of reasons why this person might be an employee, but they're generally considered a contractor. And if they are a contractor, they own the thing that they are making for you. And so this is non-intuitive, so I'm going to say this in a different way. Let's say that I hire you to write a screenplay for me, right? And I say, oh, write a horror movie for me. And then you write a 120-page script for a horror movie, and then you hand me the pieces of paper, and I pay you $2,000, and that's your payment for writing it. So I don't own the horror movie, even though I paid $2,000 for it. What I own is the 120 pieces of paper that you provided to me. I don't own the intellectual property embodied in those pieces of paper. In order to own the horror movie, such that I'd be able to make a movie out of what's written on these 120 pieces of paper, I would need a piece of paper from you saying that you assign the rights to the intellectual property surrounding the horror movie to me. And so I would need you to actually sign that from me to actually own it. And so this is incredibly important because lots of times, especially when people are starting up, they'll contact people on Fiverr or Upwork, or get a friend to design their logo or something like that. And they'll think just because they've paid this person, or just because they've done it through one of these services, that now they own the thing. And that is actually not true. And so one of the types of things that is used often to get those rights is called an assignment agreement. And so if you can literally Google assignment agreement, and you can see all sorts of differently worded assignment agreements. And so that's the type of thing that you might need when you hire someone. And it's very, very useful for someone to have sort of a standard boilerplate assignment agreement, because oftentimes you're going to be asking all sorts of random people to do all sorts of random things for you in pursuit of this business. And then once, let's say an outside investor comes in, or you make 10, 20, 50, $100,000, that person doesn't come back and say, oh, well, I actually own your logo and you didn't pay me enough the first time, so now pay me $5,000 or find a new logo. You don't want to be held hostage like that. And that happens quite a bit, right? Especially if you're making a complicated thing, right? If you're making, for example, an app, right? You can imagine 10 people might contribute programming and art and writing to the app. And then any one of those people can be the person who says that they own part of the app because of their contributions. And you want to nip that in the bud by having a contractual obligation that says that they have already transferred that intellectual property to you. So again, you can see that pretty much everything except for this last one is something that is clear at face value, but it's also the things that people don't think about enough. And to minimize your risk, remember we talked about how to minimize your probability of things going wrong. If you want to minimize your risk as much as possible, these are the things that you're going to think about very thoroughly. And again, don't necessarily leave this up to what you can think about at face value. Oh, what do I want? Well, I want an app. That's what I want. No, like you have to actually learn a lot about the thing, whatever it is that your subcontractor is creating for you, right? Whether that's an app, a website, a manufactured and engineered product, right? It's something that's being made at a factory. You have to learn about the ins and outs of those things because that's the only way that you can come up with what is actually a minimum standard that that thing needs to have, right? It's like, if I'm going back to my socks that have a heating chip in it example, right? I have no idea what the standards for the chip actually are because I'm not an electrical engineer. But I do know that if the chip shouldn't get so hot that it sets the sock on fire or that it hurts someone, right? This is the clear minimum standard that I can see at face value. But I'll need to know all of the minimum standards that I want. So I'll have to know at least something about the engineering of it to figure that out. And this is the most important thing you can do because you can solve, contracts are here to solve problems before they happen, to account for things that are predictable. And so you are trying to predict the future as much as possible and account for all of those problems so that when they happen, you've already resolved them in your favor. Again, this is not magic that only I can do because I went to school for like 3 years. Everybody else can do it because you know your business as in more depth than probably I do. All right. So third thing was what? What was the third thing on the poll?
There we go. And
Copyright.
copyright.
Okay. Do you have any good things for copyright? Copyright, privacy laws, trademarks, templates, contracts. Do I even have a copyright slide? No, I don't. All right. Well, just pretend.
That's okay. We're close on time anyway, so we can just kind of cover the main points. If
Okay, yeah. So pretend this says copyrights instead of contracts because there's no slang for it. All right. So a few things that I think are very important to understand to help yourself after this conversation. Number one, anything that is you create is almost certainly protected under copyright. Like any because it protects not just sort of books and movies and things like that, but it's literally the stuff that you write on your website, right? The copy that you might write on your website, the logo of your business, the website itself. And so copyright can be used as both a sword and a shield. A shield meaning if someone takes the information off of your website and then puts it on their own website, well, then you can use this as something that then you can tell them, hey, take it down. And there's all sorts of ways to do that. But also, you can use it as a, well, that's, I guess, sword or shield. Oh, well, yeah, so you can take it down.
yeah, I was gonna say, is that a sword or is that a shield?
Well, yeah, okay. So either someone does something to you, copies your stuff, and then you can tell them, don't copy my stuff, take it down. Or you can then, see, I should have had a slide. The sword and shield thing is just not not working out for me. Anyway, copyright works two ways. So you can take people's stuff and you can fairly use the stuff, right? So if you see all these YouTubers who make video essays on YouTube and they're using clips from movies, and how do they do that? And some of them, not all of them, but some of them are relying on the idea that you can take certain things from people and use that in your own work and be able to get away with it because it fits under certain exceptions for copyright called fair use. And so imagine there's a whole world of things that you can take from other people, right? You can take research and data from other people, right? If you have a product that involves, let's say, a lot of people's scientific research, you don't necessarily need to get their permission to use the factual information in their research, right? You can actually take their research because it's facts about the natural world, right? And then integrate it into your own product. You can take open source is something that you should look up, because if you're building apps or you're building websites, there are people who have created code and other functional stuff that you can use in your own work as long as you know the rules of the open source. So for example, it might require you to credit them, or it might require you to use it for in only certain situations. So you can use it in certain commercial situations, but not other commercial situations. And so
Shaun, I was wondering if I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just going to say, I know that we do get a lot of questions about copyright, patent, any intellectual property, issue protection, and if you could maybe just to kind of speak to like the extent that these intellectual property protection laws actually protect new founders, and should they rely heavily on things like copyright, trademark, patenting, or are there?
Okay, so it's like, oh, when should you copyright your work is sued, like should you file for a copyright or something?
Right, and
like
do you
that
think how much protection does that really offer you, or are there other ways?
So one nice thing about copyright, which is very different than trademarks or other things that we don't have time to talk about, is that you have copyright as soon as you make the creative work. So I write down a poem on a napkin, I have copyright protection in that poem. I didn't need to do anything. The poem doesn't have to be good. It just has to be original and then fixed in a tangible medium, meaning written on a piece of paper or stored on a hard drive or something like that. And then basically it's protected by copyright. What you do need to worry about is, to the extent that you have something very valuable, right? So a creative work that's very valuable. Let's say, I don't know, your whole business revolves around making online courses. And so you have a flagship course, which is the thing that you sell, right? And you make $5,000-$10,000 from this course so far, and you're wondering, oh, should I copyright protect this course formally with the US Copyright Office? The answer is probably yes, because copyright registration provides useful value. Number one, it allows someone to get more damages if the thing is copied. And so that means a lot of things, but the simple version that it means for you is that if you threaten someone who's copied your stuff without a copyright registration, they might laugh it off, because a lawyer would not necessarily want to take the case unless a lot of money was at stake, and you wouldn't be able to threaten them with something terribly severe. If you did have a copyright registration and it was registered within 3 months of publication or before the infringement, then if you threaten someone, you could threaten them with a lot, right? And lawyers would be sort of elbowing in to try to take this case because they knew they would know they would be able to recover a lot. And so let me give you a specific example to make it clear as to why copyright registration could be useful. So let's say that I created my online course and I've been making $2,000 per month on it, and I want to expand it into other courses in the future. I'm doing pretty well, and someone republishes the entire course on their own website and on YouTube. Well, if they republished it, I could send, if I didn't have a copyright registration, I could hire a lawyer and they could send a letter to them asking for what's called actual damages, meaning how much have you made from this course from putting it on YouTube and selling it? And of course, you know that people make basically nothing by putting videos on YouTube, and they might not have sold more than 1 or 2 courses, right? And they might have sold it for $1 instead of the $200 that you're charging for, right? And so the actual damages that you could recover might be $3. Contrast this with a registered copyright, which, amongst other things, gives you statutory damages and attorney's fees, right? I can say, number one, you owe me $150,000 per infringement, right? This is what the statute says you get if you have a registration and you register it within the perfect amount of time that you need to register it, right? $150,000 is a big threat because it's a real threat, right? Instead of the $3 I would have gotten without it being registered. And also attorney's fees, meaning that once I win this lawsuit against you, you also have to pay all of the costs that I had to enforce my rights against you by paying a lawyer $500 an hour to do so, right? That amount of money stacks up very, very quickly as opposed to the $3 of actual damages. And so those are some of the useful things about thinking about registering your copyrights. And so why would someone not register all of their copyrights? Because it takes time, right? It's not necessarily expensive, right? I think registration is currently $55 or something like that, right? Per work. And you can even have situations where you can register more than one work at one time. But it's still something that you have to do. And so the optimal thing is that if you're running a company that relies primarily on its copyrights in order to have value, right? So if you run a dry cleaners, it doesn't really matter what your copyrights are because you don't necessarily have them. If you're an online course company, the only value from your company comes from your copyrights. And so if you want to sell this company in the future, if you want to defend your rights, then you should make sure that you shore up your intellectual property. And how do you do that? You sort of think about the strategy for how to register your copyrights. And again, you don't have to be a lawyer to do this because unlike registering trademarks or patents, this is actually something that we tell people, you can totally do this. And we have an article on the New Media Rights website that gives examples of when it might be useful for you to do this for yourself or when it might be too complicated. But let me give you an example. All right, so an example of something that is not too complicated is you made an online course, right? Like a series of videos, and you shot them all yourself with your own camera, and you wrote all of the scripts yourself. And so you want to register it, the course, and the course is just one video, and then you can fill out this perfectly by yourself, right? Well, then let's get slightly more complicated. Well, you shot it yourself, but another person wrote the script that you're reading, and you then have them fill out one of those assignment agreements, so you own it now, but they made it originally. And then maybe you don't just have one video that makes up the course, but you have 10 videos that make up the course, and you want to register all of them at the same time to save money, right? Instead of $550, you want to spend $55. That's slightly more complicated. Can you do it yourself? Maybe, right? But then you're going to have to do more reading, right? The Copyright Office has all of these nice publications that tell you exactly how this works, but they get more confusing as the amount of variables raise. All right, well, what about you didn't actually write the course and you didn't shoot it, you hired someone to shoot it, you're just sort of hosting the course, but then you also integrated music from several third parties that you didn't actually have an assignment for, you just got from some stock website, and you also have 10 videos in the course rather than just one, you can see how the complications raise as there are more people who have some sort of ownership right, either now or before, and how you have more works that are being integrated into the final thing, that gets so complicated that if you actually want to do it right, you might want to engage an expert to do it, right? And so again, it's one of those balancing tests where if you hire a lawyer who registers your copyright for $300 rather than doing it yourself for $55, yes, you're saving money if you're a dry cleaner and you don't actually care about your copyright protection, but maybe it's not as useful if you are a company that makes apps and you absolutely rely on your intellectual property as a part of the value of your business.
And so, Shaun, I think we're going to have to wrap it.
So Tanya, very quickly, I know we have to wrap up, but Shaun, for everybody else, just insert trademark every place where he just said copyright, because I know you missed that part of it, and that's something that's also exactly what he said about copyright.
Yes.
Believe it or not, it's pretty similar. If you need patent advice, come to me. But honestly, right, Shaun?
Well, I would actually argue that I wouldn't necessarily recommend people register their own trademarks at all.
Unless it's really expensive. Okay, yeah, but I actually do. I tell them, there's examples.
This is the problem with lawyers. Nothing happens fast with lawyers, right? Everybody has.
Well, no. But the thing is that if you want to take a shot at it, as soon as you get the office action, turn around and get a lawyer.
It's
you see what I'm saying?
I'm like, oh, you want to avoid the office action.
Well, you're not going to. You're never
so,
going to get a stamp approval, right?
Well, it's okay. So it's like I would rather come up with a name that has a good sort of pathway to avoid both office actions.
Okay, but Shaun, the point I was making is that you can just you automatically get
totally.
trademark.
I think all of that is definitely.
Yeah. If you are coming for the
anyway,
if you're coming
questions.
For the class, I just wanted to say, if you're coming for the class, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. For the rest of us who got to watch that wonderful presentation with Shaun, will you take us out? Anything you want to leave us with?
Oh yeah, so we are at newmediarights.org. You can reach me at Shaun@newmediarights.org, not .com.
If you fill out the survey, we will share the content or the contact information with you. The survey link is in the chat. Complete that survey and we will share.
Yeah, and we're here to help. So we'd much rather see people early on in the process where it's much easier to solve problems than much later in the process where it gets much more difficult to solve problems. One conversation now for a half an hour can save 5 hours of heartache when you get some random letter from someone. All right, thanks a lot and take care.
I was gonna say, and if you're in the rec, we can help you set up those appointments with Shaun. And Thank you, Shaun.
And if you don't,
no time for questions.
Yeah, you're crazy if you don't.
Was that Shaun?
Any time for questions? Are we out?
You know what we actually, if any of you want to stick around for questions, I'm going to set up a breakout room, and if you would like to be put into the breakout room, please do let me know. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. Hi everyone, my name is Tanya Hertz, and I'm the director of the Regional Entrepreneurship Center, the Rec Innovation Lab at San Diego Miramar College, and I'd like to thank our partners at this time and give a special thanks to SDSU's Lavin Center, the SDSU Zip Launchpad. We'd like to thank the California Entrepreneurship Educators Conference. Also like to thank Harness, the Brink SBDC at USD, San Diego Unified Schools. We'd also like to thank School of Entrepreneurship and Technology, High Tech High, the Regional Advisory Committee, Alex Waters at the Jacobs Center, Connect All, 21IQ Labs, Startup Quest, Productified. I'd like to thank Course Key and Tech Coast Angels. Thank you to Village Up, City Heights Development Corporation, San Diego Angel Conference, Startup San Diego, SBDC, SCORE San Diego, We Are Kingdom, New Media Rights, San Diego Tech Hub, Origin 63, Ambrosio 15, OmniSync, Optima Office, Proven Recruiting, Craft Leadership, GS&L Consulting. Thank you to all of our partners. We couldn't do what we do without you. Thank you.